Well, welcome back. We're going to do our first beer. This is our first 5-gallon batch of beer for you. So we're going to use the extract kit, the one that we described in the other video, and hope you watch those. We had a video about what comes in the equipment box, and then we did a separate video on the ingredients. And now we're going to actually make 5 gallons of beer. And you'd be surprised how easy this is and how quickly we can get this done. Now, of course, it'll be a whole lot quicker, but I'm going to explain a lot of things. So feel free to fast forward through this video. Stop wherever you like. And if you have any problems or any challenges, give us a call at 254-681-1760. We'd be happy to answer your questions. Okay, some of the basic equipment I have here, I've got this empty gallon jug. I was using this just to kind of measure the amount of water that goes in here. I've got a spatula. I'm using a little rubber spatula. This is not, you don't have to have it, but it's a nice to have item when you're working with LME, the liquid malt extract. I've got my spoon or my paddle that I use to stir with. I've also got a whip. You don't have to have a whip, but I use a whip because it just kind of, it breaks up the DME real quick, that dry malt extract. My hydrometer, of course. I've got a dial thermometer that let me know how hot the water gets. I've got a can opener. I've got a hop sock. I've added this, and I'll explain when we get to that, what the hop sock's used for. And then I use Star San. This Star San is a contact sanitizer. This is a heck of a product. 1 ounce goes to 5 gallons, so you can imagine how easy it is to be too liberal with this. Please don't use GI math. 2 ounces to 5 gallons doesn't make it any better. It just makes a whole lot more suds. But it's a no-rinse contact sanitizer. And I recommend you just put it in a spray bottle and shake it up, and you can use it liberally then. We've got our fermenting bucket here. I'm going to show you. I've already washed this out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to sanitize it. And to sanitize it, I'm just going to spray it a little bit. That's a contact, and I'm going to let that sit. I'm done. Now remember, when we talk about sanitation, we're not talking about sterile. A sterile environment is really hard to achieve. You just want to be sanitary, clean and sanitary. So don't go overboard. But of course, don't undercut this process either. You'll notice I've laid out a black trash bag just to keep everything else out of the way. Now, I've got my brew pot. This is a 20-quart brew pot. I paid way too much for it. I recommend you just go to HEB. They run about $19 for a good aluminum pot or stainless steel pot that's clad. And I'm using the New Wave tabletop cooker. These things are amazing. If it's stainless steel, if it's magnetic, it has magnetic properties, it'll work. It's an induction heater. These things are really good. I've got it set on sear right now. This is getting pretty hot. So when the time comes, we'll be able to start brewing right away. And then I've got my kit. I've got the liquid malt extract, the LME in the can, is sitting in a bucket of hot water right now. And I'm letting that warm up because it's so much easier to work with when it's warm. I also have my ingredients, my 2 1-pound bags of dry malt extract, my hop pellets, my yeast, and that's all I'll need out of here for now because the priming sugar and the bottle caps are for way, way later on. So I'm going to put this box away. We no longer need that. One additional thing that I brought today that I want to share with you is, of course, there are several techniques for brewing beer. Just remember that once you get 3 gallons boiling, you've got to cool that before you can add your yeast, because if you add the yeast too early and your wort is too hot, about 110 degrees, you'll kill that yeast, and then you'll have challenges. So you've got to get it down below 80 degrees. The closer to 70 degrees you can get it, the better off you're going to be. Now there's a couple of ways to do that. One is to use an immersion chiller, a wort chiller. And you may have seen those. Those are copper coil, and you place it inside about the last 15 minutes of the boil to sterilize that. And then you just run tap water through it. And that'll cool your wort. Another way to do that, I find real easy, is ice. About 8 pounds of ice, this is a 10-pound bag, about 8 pounds of ice is equal to a gallon of water. So what I'll do is, once I finish boiling, I got almost 3 gallons of water in here. Once I finish boiling and I turn everything off and it's time for me to try to achieve that cold break, I'll add 8 pounds of ice. That'll bring it up to a little over 4 gallons of water. And it leaves me a little bit of leeway. When I add it to my bucket, it's cooler, and then I can start adding tap water and bring that temperature down to an appropriate range. Normally about 8 pounds of ice will do it. I might even throw the whole 10 pounds in there. It doesn't really matter. You just want to make sure you get it below 80 degrees so that when you do pitch your yeast, that it doesn't kill the yeast. So that's where we're at right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wait for this to heat up. I've read the instructions. The instructions are pretty straightforward, but in this particular case, it doesn't tell you how long to boil. The instructions say, look at the instruction sheet for how long to boil. I guess you have to ascertain that. But this is in the amber kit, and amber ale. What it does tell you is that you have to boil the hops for 45 minutes. And since this is a bittering hop, I know it goes in for the entire time. So we're going to wind up boiling this for 45 minutes once we get it all mixed up. So we'll be back in a few moments when this gets warmed up enough for me to get started. Thank you. All right, well, we're back. We've got our liquid malt extract. You'll notice before it had a label on it. Of course, that came off after sitting in the warm water. We've got our dry malt extract, our yeast, and our hops. Our pot of hot water. It's pretty warm now, so it's just about time to start adding these ingredients. And then here's how simple it really is. Just remove the top. I'm going to use my ladle, and while we're adding this in, I'm going to stir just so that it doesn't scorch on the bottom of this pot. There we go. And this starts to turn it a really nice amber brownish color. And of course, I've used my Star Sand spray, and I've sprayed all over this table, just on this plastic, just so everything's sanitary, but not sterile. We're not talking about operating room sterile. I'm going to use this just to make sure I get the rest of that extract out, because it's really thick. It's like a syrup. And the more of it you can get out, of course, the better off you're going to be. You want to use all of it. You paid for it. You might as well use every bit of it. So these plastic ladles are really, really useful. It really makes getting all of that out of that can a whole lot easier than just trying to leave it turned upside down. So there we go. I think we got just about as much as we're going to get out of there. And then I'll get that off the end of that spoon. Now that rolled over onto the table, so what I need to do is I need to make sure that thing remains sanitary. So there's a process. Just give it a spray, a shake. It's a contact sanitizer, so you can go right back out and start using it again. Now, this concoction is starting to heat up. I'm getting really close to a boil. And that's where I want to be, because I'm going to boil this for about 45 minutes. But before I do that, and now it's time to add our dry malt extract. Now I'll show you why I prefer dry malt extract, because to me it's just a whole lot easier to use. But some people like liquid, and that's okay. So I've opened up 1 pound of Mutton's Light dry malt extract. I've got my whip. There it goes. Wow, that was really easy. And then all you got to do is just whip it a few times just to make sure you don't have any chunks, because that stuff is really dry. And if you get any humidity, once you've got an open package and any humidity in it, it'll start to crystallize like a candy and get really, really sticky. That's the first one. Then I'm going to insert the second one. Oops, see, I got powder all over myself already. There, that's going to be sticky. And then I do the same thing. I just start dumping it in. There we go. And look, you can see it's starting to crystallize on the bag from the humidity, from the steam that's been rising. So this stuff is extremely dry and will soak up any humidity at all. Now, there, I've got that all nice and mixed in. And you only have to mix a little bit just to make sure that there's no clumps. And then we're going to sit back here in just a few minutes, and we're going to let this come to a boil. But before we do that, now I would normally use the paddle, but that's a lot of times when you have grain and things. I don't need the paddle in this particular case. I told you before we were going to talk about the hop sock. Right before it starts to boil, according to the instructions, you add the hops, and you'll boil the hops for a whole 45 minutes. To me, the challenge is once you put the hops in, when you're done, you got to get the hops out. So that means you're going to wind up having to strain your beer or your wort into the bucket to try to prevent the hops from going in there. But I mean, it really doesn't matter. If they go in there, that's fine. They're going to settle later. But that's just additional stuff inside your beer that you got to get out later on. So I prefer to use what we call a hop sock. And this is like a Muslim sock. We've got them here in the store. To me, they're actually reusable. I've got them all different colors. They'll turn brown, green, orange color. But you're throwing them into something that's boiling, so it's going to it'll sterilize it anyway. So what I do is I open up my 1 ounce of Kent Golding hops, and I add them to the sock. Now you'll notice that they only fill up a really small corner down here, but once they get inside here, inside your wort, they're going to soak up a lot of that water and they're going to expand. And that's where all the flavor and the bittering and the aroma is going to come from. So you want to make sure you tie it off up here so that there's enough room for them to expand. Now the beauty behind this is it now becomes a hop tea bag. So that at the end of your boil, all you got to do is remove the tea bag and all the hops come out with it. You don't have any more sediment left inside your beer. All you've got is beer that's hopped. So we're going to drop that in now because it's getting ready to start its boil. I can see it starting to rumble. There you go, a shake, a spray, a shake. Give it one more good stir. And we've got ourselves a short rolling boil. Now pay attention to it when it gets to this point because it can very easily boil over. If your wort does start to boil over, just turn the heat off. Have a little bit of water set aside, just a little bit. You can have a small glass of water. If it starts to boil over, you can arrest that immediately by just dousing it with water, with cool water. But when it starts to roll back up again, it'll start to boil over again. So make sure you're adjusting the temperature. The type of boil you're looking for is you're looking for a small rolling boil, not a vicious, robust, tremendous boil. You're not looking to get it that. You're just looking for a small rolling boil. It'll be 212 degrees. And allow this. Now I'm going to let this sit for 45 minutes. So at the end of 45 minutes, we'll be back and I'll show you how to cool this, add it to your fermenting bucket, pitch the yeast, and then we're on our way to making beer. Okay, we're back. We boiled for our 45 minutes, so our pot's ready. I've already got it turned off and sitting here. I'm going to remove the thermometer for right now. We'll put it back in there in a few minutes. But now I'm going to show you what we go through. But you know, a lot of times I get questions, why do we boil? Well, we boil for a couple of different reasons. One is you're going to boil to sterilize the water and also to sterilize the sugars that you've already added. You're boiling the hops because you're trying to extract the oils out of the hops, and that's for bitterness. Now the difference between bittering hops and aroma hops is nothing more than merely how long you boil them. If you boil them for a long period of time, say in excess of 30 minutes, it's normally a bittering hop because you want the bittering flavors from those hops. If you're looking for some more florals or some more aroma from your hops, well then you throw those in the last 5 minutes or so because all you're trying to do then is you're trying to extract all those floral flavors from it. So that's what we've done. Now, what I've got here is I've got a strainer. I'm going to go ahead and sanitize this. It's already been cleaned. I'm going to remove those hops. Remember we talked about those earlier. The easiest way to remove them is to put them in a bag, use it like a tea bag, drop them in a strainer, give them a real quick squeeze. And then you are finished with those hops. And you'll notice how large that thing it turned out to be. It kind of expanded quite a bit because it soaked up a lot of that water. So we're going to discard those because we no longer need those. We're going to place our strainer aside. We're going to give it another stir just because we're here. Now, our water right now is about 212. Well, it's starting to come down a little bit. It's no longer a rolling boil. Now what we want to do is we want to cool this. We want to cool it to a temperature that we can pitch the yeast in. So keep in mind that when we add this wort, and now it's called wort, when we add this to our fermenting bucket, we're going to do it twice because we're trying to introduce oxygen. We've boiled out most of that oxygen, and now we're going to introduce oxygen back into our wort. Remember, oxygen is your friend for fermentation. Oxygen is your enemy after fermentation. So that's why we use an airlock in our fermentation chamber. So we're going to introduce oxygen, but first we're going to try to cool this. So the first thing I'm going to do is, remember we talked about that 10-pound bag of ice. I'm going to go ahead and introduce this ice and see what I can cool this down to a reasonable temperature. And here we go. Just be careful of the splash because that is extremely hot wort. There we go. That's probably about 8 pounds of ice right now. Now I'm going to use my paddle, spray it, because I'm going to sanitize it, give it a shake, and then we'll just start to stir this. Now this is going to introduce more water, and remember your tap water is perfectly fine for brewing beer. If your tap water tastes fine to you, then it's going to make an exquisite beer. If there's some off flavors in your tap water and you just don't seem to trust it, well, then use bottled water. But I would stray away from distilled water for two reasons. One, distilled water is very expensive when you try to get that much of it. And number two, all the minerals and everything that your yeast are looking for, your free amino nitrogen, all those things have been removed through the distillation process. And you have to reintroduce those in order for your yeast to become very healthy. So stray away from distilled water, but if you want to use spring water or bottled water, Evian, feel free to do so. But if you're happy with your tap water, why not use it? You're going to sterilize it by boiling it. So it really does make an exquisite beer. All that ice is melted now, and we're going to take a temperature reading here. And right now I'm using a dial thermometer, so it's a little lagging. Right now it's about 115 degrees, so it's still a little bit too hot for me to add the yeast. I'm going to add the remainder of this ice, and that should bring it down just a little bit. So we've covered why we boil. Uses of water. Now if you're trying to mimic a certain water table, because that's the only thing that makes a beer different is the water table. A beer brewed in one location is going to taste a little bit different brewed in another location if you're using a different water table, because the water is the basis for your beer. Oh yeah, it's coming down. Now we're down to about, we're down to about 100 degrees now. So what we're going to do with this is we're going to add this to our fermenter, and we're going to pour it right into the fermenting bucket. And then we're going to pour it back into the brew kettle, and then we're going to pour it back into the fermenting bucket. And the reason we're going to do that is we're going to try to introduce the oxygen that we boiled out of that. So I'm going to do that now, and you can watch as we do that. I'm going to set this bucket right here. I'm going to very carefully, take this. This is almost 4.5 gallons or so. And you'll notice I'm doing this a high pour, a very high pour. And you'll see it'll start to foam up on you. That's kind of what you're looking for. You're trying to introduce oxygen. So I'll place that down there, and then I'm going to pour it back one time. And do the same thing. It'll be a high pour. That'll introduce. And our fermenting bucket, you'll notice here is your mark. This is about where we are. We're just a little bit over 4 gallons of warm wort. And we need to get to 5 gallons. But I recommend, and it's up to you. There's different techniques. Different people do it different ways. But I recommend you go all the way up to the bottom of this tab, which will give you about 5 1/4, 5.5 gallons. And the reason for that is that as you transfer this beer from this bucket into your bottling bucket, you don't want to suck up any of that trub that's on the bottom. So you'll wind up sacrificing a little bit of that beer. The yeast doesn't care if it's 5 gallons or 5.5 gallons. The only thing the yeast cares about is how much sugar is in here to ferment. And the difference between 5.2% by volume and 5.187% by volume is going to be really hard for you to distinguish. So I always recommend you fill it up just a little bit extra so that you get a full 5 gallons of beer, which is 48 to 54 bottles. And they say that depending on how many you sacrifice. But we're going to make sure you don't sacrifice that many. You'll siphon it all the way down to the bottom, but you'll have that extra beer in there. All right, so now we're at this point. I've got some more cold water. We're going to add that, and it should take about 1 gallon to bring it up. It might take a little more. I've got all that foam on top. It's going to be a really, really, really good beer. There we go. We're right a little bit. See there, I got about another 1/2 gallon or 1/4 gallon to go. I'm going to add that to it. So that 1 gallon additional, so that was all 3 gallons of water, 10 pounds of ice, and 1 gallon of water brought me up to almost to the bottom of this lip, which is close enough for me. I'm going to take a temperature reading for us to get ready to add our yeast. Now there's a couple different ways you can do that. The one I like to do is most direct method is to just open up the pack of yeast and sprinkle it on top of your beer, and it'll hydrate, and then your yeast will come to life. It will start eating those fermentable sugars, and the byproduct of the yeast that are eating those sugars, those fermentable sugars, is going to be ethyl alcohol and CO2, which are the 2 things that you're looking for. So we're going to get to that right now. The other way to do that is to you can do a yeast starter. Just get a small jar of water, with a little bit of sugar in it just to get the yeast started. Pour the yeast in just like your mom would do for when she was making bread using bread yeast. You know, just get the yeast started. You'll see the yeast starts to get active, and then you can pour that yeast inside your beer as well. Both methods work. Some people ascribe to doing a yeast starter. Others like to pour their yeast directly into pitch it right into their beer. I like to pitch it right into the beer because to me, I'm going to hydrate it right here. So that's what we're going to do next. I'm going to open this up. Then I'm just going to sprinkle this yeast all across the top of that beer. And it's real easy. Now remember, we said that oxygen was your best friend for fermentation, and it's really oxygenated now. But it's your worst enemy after fermentation. So what we're going to do now is we're going to create an environment where your yeast will survive, multiply, and eat all these sugars. That's what they're going to do, but they're going to do it in an oxygen-free environment because they're going to start to expel all that oxygen through CO2 that's going to come out the top of your bucket. So we're going to add the bucket lid, and these bucket lids goes on pretty tight. You got to make sure it's nice and tight because you got that seal that's around the outside. If that seal is not sealed completely, and of course sanitize your lid before you put it on there. If it's not sealed completely, you'll have some CO2 that's escaping. But look, don't worry about it. Your beer's still going to ferment. You're just not going to be able to see the activity that's going on. So that's where the airlock comes in. This airlock permits CO2 to escape, but it prevents oxygen from coming back in, from re-entering your vessel. That gives you that environment for your yeast to thrive in. And remember, oxygen was your enemy after fermentation, so you want to keep that oxygen out. And to do that, we've got this small vial here, and it's about half full of water, and it's got a small float. And every time your CO2 level rises and the pressure starts to rise, and it'll rise dramatically, it's going to push that vial up. The oxygen will escape. The CO2 will escape, and when enough is escaped, that vial will drop back down, and it creates a water barrier so that air doesn't get back in. So you've got one-way action from inside the bucket outside, and nothing can get from the outside back in the bucket. And that's the kind of environment you're looking for. And all we do is just insert that into our grommeted hole, and within 24 hours, you should see some activity going on. This thing should start bouncing up and down and making all kind of noise. It makes everybody happy to watch it. Now, your fermentation will take place between, most of it will happen within the first 72 hours. And then at that point, your yeast have eaten all the sugar that they're going to eat. And then they're going to drop to the bottom. So I hope that answers all your questions. You know, the only thing that we didn't show you on the video was taking our hydrometer reading, which is something you do right prior to your pitching your yeast. And you can do that by just grabbing your hydrometer and drop it into the bucket, and you can read it on the scale. No need to try to remove it remove any of your beer from the bucket. You can just drop it in, because you should be able to see it. So we've taken a hydrometer reading, and I can see that the pressure is starting to build up now because I can start seeing some movement. And what will happen, you'll see that start moving. What I'm doing is I'm causing that increase of pressure by pushing on the bucket lid, and you'll see that's moving up and down. That's what will take place. So hope this clarifies or shows you how easy it is to make beer. We say if you can make pizza or if you can boil water, you can make beer. We just made 5 gallons of beer. We'll see you on the next video. Well, welcome back. We're going to do our first beer. This is our first 5-gallon batch of beer for you. So we're going to use the extract kit, the one that we described in the other video, and hope you watch those. We had a video about what comes in the equipment box, and then we did a separate video on the ingredients. And now we're going to actually make 5 gallons of beer. And you'd be surprised how easy this is and how quickly we can get this done. Now, of course, it'll be a whole lot quicker, but I'm going to explain a lot of things. So feel free to fast forward through this video. Stop wherever you like. And if you have any problems or any challenges, give us a call at 254-681-1760. We'd be happy to answer your questions. Okay, some of the basic equipment I have here, I've got this empty gallon jug. I was using this just to kind of measure the amount of water that goes in here. I've got a spatula. I'm using a little rubber spatula. This is not, you don't have to have it, but it's a nice to have item when you're working with LME, the liquid malt extract. I've got my spoon. or my paddle that I use to stir with. I've also got a whip. You don't have to have a whip, but I use a whip because it just kind of it breaks up the DME real quick, that dry malt extract. My hydrometer, of course. I've got a dial thermometer that let me know how hot the water gets. I've got a can opener. I've got a hop sock. I've added this, and I'll explain when we get to that, what the hop socks are used for. And then I use Star San. This Star San is a contact sanitizer. This is a heck of a product. 1 ounce goes to 5 gallons, so you can imagine how easy it is to be too liberal with this. Please don't use GI math. 2 ounces to 5 gallons doesn't make it any better. It just makes a whole lot more suds. But it's a no-rinse contact sanitizer. And I recommend you just put it in a spray bottle and shake it up, and you can use it liberally then. We've got our fermenting bucket here. I'm going to show you. I've already washed this out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to sanitize it. And to sanitize it, I'm just going to spray it a little bit. That's a contact, and I'm going to let that sit. I'm done. Now remember, when we talk about sanitation, we're not talking about sterile. A sterile environment is really hard to achieve. You just want to be sanitary, clean and sanitary. So don't go overboard, but of course don't undercut this process either. You'll notice